Enochian magic is a system of ceremonial practice that emerged in the late 16th century through the work of the Elizabethan scholar John Dee and his associate Edward Kelly. Despite the variety of interpretations it has inspired, Enochian magic remains centered on angelic communications, intricate language systems, and elaborate magical tables and calls. John Dee was a respected mathematician, astronomer, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, reputed for his expansive knowledge of natural philosophy and esotericism. However, beginning in 1582, Dee turned his attention toward more spiritual matters, seeking direct communication with angelic beings. He believed that by conversing with angels, mankind might regain lost wisdom from a time before the biblical fall of Adam. This is a time when human understanding of divine knowledge had supposedly been complete, at the expense of worldly knowledge. This pursuit led him to collaborate with Edward Kelly, a man of uncertain background, but one who claimed the rare ability to communicate with angels through a crystal ball. From 1582 to around 1589, Dee and Kelly conducted numerous scrying sessions. Dee would record the dialogues in detailed diaries, while Kelly served as the medium through whom the angels spoke. Over time, the entities they communicated with revealed an intricate language, now known as the Enochian or angelical language, that was said to predate human speech. This was purportedly the language spoken by angels, and also the direct language of God himself, at least when communicating with these beings. The angels also delivered a complex cosmology, including instructions for constructing magical tables and using special calls, or keys, to access different spiritual realms. The name Enochian derives from the biblical figure Enoch, a patriarch who is said to have walked with God and who appears in various apocryphal texts associated with hidden wisdom. In some interpretations, Dee and Kelly's angelic communications were considered a recovery of the knowledge Enoch once possessed. The language revealed to Dee and Kelly is one of the most distinctive aspects of Enochian magic. The angelic, or Enochian language, is composed of a unique alphabet, vocabulary, and grammar, purportedly given directly by angelic beings. Dee meticulously recorded these messages in his diaries, sometimes including complex encryption and tabular systems. In practice, Enochian magic makes extensive use of these calls, which are lengthy invocations composed in the angelic language. These keys are believed to open the doors to various angelic realms, granting the magician access to spiritual insights and potentially supernatural powers. The magical system is arranged around the Great Table or tablets, 4 elemental tables: air, water, earth, and fire, each subdivided into numerous squares containing letters. By employing these calls in conjunction with the tablets, the magician aims to interact with hierarchies of angels associated with particular elements, directions, and cosmological layers. Over time, these complex correspondences and linguistic structures have led to a wide range of interpretations and practical approaches. Some practitioners see Enochian magic as a system intended to elevate the practitioner's spiritual consciousness, while others regard it as a method of obtaining hidden knowledge. It's important to note that Dee and Kelly's recorded materials can be difficult to parse. Scholars often debate the authenticity and coherence of the Enochian system. Some argue that Kelly may have fabricated or channeled these communications from his subconscious. Others maintain that Dee and Kelly's angelic dialogues contain genuine visionary material that should be understood within the context of early modern Christian mysticism. Notably, Dee himself never seems to have used the system in a fully developed magical practice. Instead, he mainly recorded and preserved the information, leaving subsequent generations to interpret and implement it as a workable system of magic. Further, Dee and Kelly had a falling out after the angel Uriel told Kelly that Dee ought to share his wife with Kelly. He apparently did so, but this use or abuse of the system apparently soured John Dee on future workings with Edward Kelly. Oh, also Kelly may have knocked up Dee's wife. Maury wasn't around in the 16th century, so I guess we'll never get the big paternity reveal, though. Interest in Enochian magic lay dormant for centuries, until the late 19th century, when the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn rediscovered Dee's manuscripts. In the Golden Dawn's formulation, the Enochian system became more accessible to modern magicians. They restructured the elemental tablets, refined the pronunciation and interpretation of the calls, and integrated Enochian magic into a progressive curriculum of spiritual development. Aleister Crowley was also deeply influenced by Enochian magic. Crowley studied Dee's diaries and incorporated Enochian elements into his own magical workings, often blending them with Thelemic principles. Haitian Voodoo is a syncretic religion that emerged in Haiti during the colonial era and has its roots in various West and Central African spiritual traditions. Over time, it blended with elements of Roman Catholicism, introduced by the French colonial presence, resulting in a complex religious and esoteric system. The historical origins of voodoo can be traced back to the 17th and 18th centuries, when the island of Hispaniola was a French colony named Saint-Domingue. Africans, primarily from regions corresponding to modern-day Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and the Congo area, brought with them distinct spiritual practices and cosmologies. These traditions, known as Vodun, carried a pantheon of spirits, ancestral reverence, and an understanding of the divine infused in everyday life. This syncretic blending was facilitated by a shared spiritual logic. The African deities, known as Loa in Haitian Voodoo, were likened to Catholic saints. The Africans often took advantage of the Catholic practice of venerating saints, depicted in statues and images, to represent their own African spirits, thereby preserving their traditions. This identification wasn't just a pragmatic necessity to keep traditions alive. It reflected a mutual understanding that divine forces manifest in numerous ways. The people understood certain saints to be manifestations of the gods they had previously worshipped, based on overlapping powers and abilities associated with them. Haitian voodoo ceremonies often involve singing, drumming, spirit possession, and offerings to the spirits who act as intermediaries between humans and the Supreme Creator. Participants might dance and sing in rhythmic patterns, facilitating a trance state that allows spirits to possess an individual, temporarily speaking through them to offer guidance. One prominent magical practice in Haitian voodoo is the preparation of gris-gris, small amulets or pouches filled with herbs, powders, and charged with spiritual energy. These objects are believed to offer protection, attract love, or bring luck. Another key practice is spiritual baths, which cleanse negative energies and restore balance, often involving sacred water, herbs, and prayers. However, there's a darker side of voodoo practice, and priests called bokor can be hired to curse enemies or create potions with disturbing effects. Perhaps most famously, these bokor can be hired to create zombies, which I'll be discussing later in this video. Notably, while voodoo dolls are often associated with Haitian voodoo in popular culture, they don't figure prominently in Haitian practice. Instead, the prevalence of voodoo dolls comes from Louisiana voodoo, which, while similar to the Haitian variant, definitely needs to be explored in its own entry in this series. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe and to hit the notification bell. Now let's get back to business. Skinwalkers are figures rooted in traditional Navajo beliefs, regarded as malevolent practitioners of witchcraft who can assume the form of animals. They derive from the Navajo word commonly translated as "with it" he goes on all fours. Such individuals are not ordinary community members, but are considered corrupt witches who have chosen to forsake the established paths of healing and spirituality. Instead of using their abilities for beneficial purposes, they employ them to harm others, spread fear, and disrupt communal harmony. The history of skinwalker lore can be traced through generations of Navajo oral tradition, passed down long before the arrival of Europeans. While the Navajo have no written language historically, their stories, ceremonial practices, and historical memories have been meticulously preserved through narration. Anthropologists studying Navajo culture, beginning during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, learned that skinwalker beliefs were long-standing and intricately woven into local cosmologies. Though these researchers were often met with reluctance because discussing skinwalkers is taboo among the Navajo, they confirmed that the concept preceded any modern influences. Early fieldwork by such scholars documented the taboo status of these stories, noting that Navajo people would seldom mention them openly for fear of retribution or misfortune. In traditional Navajo cosmology, the realm of the spiritual is not separate from everyday life. Shamans and medicine men devote themselves to healing ceremonies, complex chants, and the maintenance of communal and individual well-being. Their role is to restore balance and harmony and ensure the orderly functioning of the world. However, those who become skinwalkers deliberately invert this role. They receive training similar to that of medicine men, but then misuse this sacred knowledge for dark purposes. This transition typically involves breaking severe cultural taboos, such as slaying a close relative, an act believed to poison the practitioner's spiritual core and grant twisted powers. Accounts collected by anthropologists and historians indicate that skinwalkers are said to target individuals for reasons both personal and arbitrary. They are blamed for unexplained illnesses, sudden deaths, the loss of livestock, and psychological distress. In many traditional Navajo communities, people employ protective measures against them, such as using certain herbs and spices and seeking the assistance of knowledgeable healers. Contemporary Navajo often avoid public discussions of skinwalkers, since even uttering their names is thought to attract unwanted attention. Basically, since skinwalkers are so arbitrary and destructive, the safest bet is to simply keep your head down and hope you don't draw any attention. There are historical references to skinwalker beliefs in the notes of early traders, missionaries, and government officials who interacted with the Navajo. Although these outsiders often misunderstood the cultural context, their writings provide glimpses into how pervasive the fear and belief were. For instance, certain late 19th century U.S. military records hint that Navajo scouts and interpreters were unwilling to go to places associated with what were then called witches. In terms of historical practice, there is no record of organized skinwalker cults or coven-type groups. However, there have been whispered suggestions that certain groups of skinwalkers met in secluded spots to exchange their knowledge. Such gatherings, if they ever occurred, remain largely speculative. In recent years, skinwalkers have gained immense popularity beyond their traditional Navajo cultural context. Once rarely spoken about, these entities have emerged as a familiar trope in pop culture, online, and in horror media. The ancient Druids have long held a place in popular imagination, often depicted as mysterious and wise natural priests and magicians conducting rituals in forests or megaliths. Over the centuries, Druids have been romanticized and reimagined, and today there are groups who consciously identify as modern Druids, drawing inspiration from ancient Celtic spirituality. The ancient Druids flourished in Celtic cultures primarily between approximately 300 BC and the Roman conquest of Gaul and Britain in the 1st centuries BC and AD respectively. The word druid likely derives from a combination of Proto-Celtic terms, suggesting an association with oak trees and wisdom. Oak trees held symbolic importance and were closely associated with the natural world that Druids revered. The Druids were active in regions spanning parts of modern-day Ireland, Britain, and continental Europe, wherever Celtic tribes settled. Though their influence varied over time and geography, Druids appear to have shared certain broad similarities. They acted as intermediaries between people and the divine. They held responsibilities in passing on tribal and natural lore and delivering legal judgments, and guided magical nature rituals. One of the main challenges in studying historical Druids lies in the limited primary sources available. The Celts, including the Druids, passed down their traditions orally and didn't maintain their own written records. Much of what we know comes from descriptions by Greek and Roman authors, including Julius Caesar, who wrote about the Druids in his commentaries on the Gallic War. Caesar described them as a class of priests who oversaw religious ceremonies, served as judges in disputes, educated the youth, and wielded considerable political influence. The Druids' religious practices focused on maintaining harmony with nature and the spiritual realm, often involving sacred groves, which were forest clearings considered holy places. Trees, especially oaks and mistletoe, featured prominently in their rituals. While popular culture frequently associates Druids with Stonehenge, historical Druids didn't play a role in the construction of this Neolithic monument, which was built millennia before Druids existed. That said, it's open to interpretation whether the Druids used Stonehenge as a holy site, but most modern scholars think these are modern inventions. Modern Druidry, sometimes called Druidism, has taken root as a nature-based spiritual path embraced by people worldwide. Many modern Druids are motivated by environmental concerns, a desire to reconnect with the natural world, and an interest in Celtic mythology and spirituality. Modern Druid rituals often revolve around the seasonal festivals associated with Celtic traditions, such as Samhain, as well as the solstices and equinoxes. These ceremonies frequently take place outdoors, in forests, near ancient sites, or beside rivers and springs, reflecting a central tenet of Druid spirituality, reverence for the earth. Black magic, often understood as the use of supernatural powers for malevolent or selfish purposes, has a long and complex history that spans cultures and continents. People have practiced rituals and spells intended to harm enemies, bring misfortune, or manipulate circumstances for personal gain for millennia. While the concept itself may vary according to region and era, black magic is generally contrasted with white magic, which is deemed benevolent or healing. Throughout history, black magic has been intertwined with religion, folklore, cultural beliefs, and even political struggles, leading to social upheaval, persecution, and widespread misunderstandings that persist to this day. From the earliest civilizations to the modern age, it's never been a static phenomenon, and the nuances surrounding it are as abundant as the number of cultures that have defined it differently. The roots of black magic stretch back to antiquity, where the line between what we'd now consider religious practice and magical rites was often blurred. In the ancient Near East and Egypt, magic wasn't typically separated into categories of good and evil in the same way it is today. Nevertheless, certain incantations or rituals aimed at harming adversaries or influencing powerful rulers were whispered about and feared. One common early use of black magic in Egypt were ritual objects or texts inscribed with the names of enemies. They were often written on pottery or figurines, which were then smashed or buried to symbolically destroy the target. In Greece and Rome, magical papyri and curse tablets, small lead tablets inscribed with harmful intentions, were used against enemies competitors or unfaithful lovers. Such practices, while not always singled out as black magic, were widely recognized as manipulative and dangerous, despite being widely practiced. As Christianity spread through the late Roman Empire and throughout medieval Europe, the notion of what constituted harmful magic became more explicit. In the Christian worldview, any practice of magic that didn't rely on divine grace was suspicious, and the use of demonic forces to achieve earthly ends was mostly categorically condemned. Notably, there were exceptions, with the understanding that very powerful magicians of the past, such as King Solomon, could bind demons in a holy rather than unholy way. By the Middle Ages, black magic in Europe was generally understood to be any form of sorcery that relied upon calling on the devil or malevolent spirits, regardless of intent. Church authorities launched campaigns to stamp out unholy practices, and the line between what we'd now call folklore, healing practices, and black magic became increasingly blurred. Many herbalists, wise men and wise women, folk healers, and more were cast under suspicion if their activities didn't align with Christian orthodoxy. The tension grew, culminating in the early modern period, when witchcraft hysteria gripped Europe. While Europe's witchcraft hysteria eventually waned with the Enlightenment, interest in the occult didn't disappear. By the 19th century, secret societies, spiritualist movements, and occult revivals in Western Europe and the United States brought renewed attention to esoteric traditions. Some groups and individuals flirted with what they called the left-hand path, a term frequently associated with more transgressive, and thus more black, forms of magic. Notable figures like Crowley explored ceremonial magic that, while not necessarily black magic in the medieval sense, was portrayed as taboo, subversive, and sometimes dangerous. In non-Western cultures, the understanding of black magic has also been varied. Across parts of Africa, the Caribbean, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, certain ritualistic practices have long been labeled as black magic by outsiders. For example, as we discussed earlier, Haitian voodoo ritual practices have been widely understood to be all black magic all the time. However, many forms of Haitian voodoo do encompass forms of white magic related to health and good fortune. It's also worth noting that modern Western occult traditions sometimes reclaim terms like black magic to signify nonconformity, personal freedom, or spiritual exploration. For instance, some modern occultists argue that black magic represents a willingness to engage with darker aspects of human experience. They claim that practicing black magic challenges oppressive religious or cultural frameworks. Generally, though not always, these practitioners don't necessarily seek to harm others. Rather, they use the term black magic as a statement of separation from conventional morality. Zombies have become familiar figures in popular culture, often seen lumbering across movie screens or shambling through the pages of horror novels. Yet, behind the fictional ghouls that dominate modern media lies a disturbing tradition, one originating in the occult practices of Haitian voodoo. The word zombie is widely believed to derive from West African terms such as Nzambi or Zumbi, which refer to spirits or the souls of the dead. Within Haitian voodoo cosmology, the spirit world exists in constant interaction with the living, and the soul can be subject to manipulation by powerful ritualists known as bokors. The traditional Haitian zombie is not a flesh-eating ghoul, but rather a reanimated corpse or living person whose soul or willpower has been stolen. Haitian folklore describes bokors as having the knowledge to poison individuals, induce a death-like state, and then later revive them as mindless servants. According to these narratives, the victim's sense of self is destroyed, leaving them vulnerable to the bokor's commands. The Haitian Penal Code has historically included statutes outlawing zombification, treating it as a capital offense. This, of course, was direct legal recognition that someone could be zombified, stripped of their will, and made to appear dead. One of the most significant investigations was conducted by Wade Davis, an ethnobotanist who traveled to Haiti in the 1980s. Davis aimed to identify compounds that Bokors allegedly used to transform the living into zombies. He proposed that a combination of tetrodotoxin, a potent neurotoxin found in pufferfish, and other locally sourced chemicals could induce a death-like coma. This would slow bodily functions to the point where a victim might be presumed dead and later retrieved and revived by the Bokor. According to Davis, once the victim regained consciousness, their psychological trauma and cultural conditioning could lead them to behave like a docile servant. Davis's research was met with some skepticism. Critics argued that his chemical analyses were inconclusive and that cultural or psychological factors may play a larger role. However, it remains one of the most comprehensive attempts to verify the scientific legitimacy of Haitian zombification. Indeed, there are documented cases that lend credibility to at least some of Davis's claims. Take, for instance, the story of Clervius Narcisse, a Haitian man who allegedly died in 1962, was buried, and later reappeared in 1980. Narcisse claimed he had been resurrected as a zombie and forced to work on a plantation, only to escape later when the Bokor controlling him died. This bizarre tale sparked scientific curiosity and public fascination, prompting Davis's investigations. While no conclusive proof emerged that Narcisse truly died and was resurrected, medical records did show that he was pronounced dead and buried. Records also showed that he had been placed in a morgue for over a day before being buried. His reappearance suggested that either he had been misdiagnosed and buried alive, or that something even more extraordinary and sinister had taken place. Others have suggested the person who reappeared in 1962 wasn't actually Clervius Narcisse, but an individual who stole the identity of a dead man to profit off a zombie narrative. In more recent times, global popular culture has embraced the zombie, detaching it almost entirely from its Haitian roots. The modern zombie owes its popularity largely to George Romero's film Night of the Living Dead and its successors, which reimagined zombies as undead hordes. These zombies, too, are often removed from their occult context, instead providing a science fiction-based theme for why people turned into zombies. So like many of you, I'm a fan of zombies, having consumed probably thousands of hours of zombie-based content over the course of my life. From an occult perspective, zombies are endlessly fascinating because they embody the interplay between life, death, and the unknown forces that govern our existence. The idea that the soul or essence of a person could have partially or wholly departed while the body remains animated is both deeply disturbing and fascinating. To me, zombies, at least in their original context, are a potent representation of control and autonomy. In Haitian voodoo lore, the creation of a zombie is tied to the idea of spiritual entrapment. The Bokors, who manipulate individuals into a zombified state, highlight the dark potential of spiritual knowledge when used irresponsibly. They represent the ultimate loss of self, a soulless existence driven by the will of another. As someone intrigued by the occult, I find this theme particularly compelling because it forces us to question what makes us human. Zombies broke out of their original context in Haitian voodoo and into science fiction and pop culture due to their profound symbolic flexibility. In modern narratives, they embody fears of societal collapse, black swan events, and the loss of individuality, resonating with a global audience. The zombie archetype adapts seamlessly to different genres, representing everything from biological experimentation gone wrong to apocalyptic survival scenarios to evil rituals. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a deep dive video on zombies, since I'm endlessly fascinated by them and clearly want to rant about them. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy stands as a cornerstone in Western esoteric literature. Published in 1533, this comprehensive work delves into the realms of natural magic, astrology, and divine mysteries, reflecting the Renaissance obsession with both science and mysticism. Agrippa, a German polymath born in 1486, was deeply immersed in the intellectual currents of his time. His engagement with Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Neoplatonism is evident throughout his writings. The 3 books of occult philosophy emerged during a period when Europe was experiencing a resurgence of interest in ancient wisdom and esoteric traditions. This era, marked by the Renaissance, saw scholars striving to reconcile classical knowledge with contemporary thought. The treatise is divided into 3 distinct books, each addressing different facets of what was then defined as occult philosophy. The first book explores the natural world, emphasizing the hidden properties of elements, plants, animals, and minerals. Agrippa discusses how these natural objects possess inherent virtues that can be harnessed through proper understanding and application. He delves into the 4 elements, earth, water, air, and fire, and their corresponding qualities, asserting that a deep comprehension of these elements is essential for practicing natural magic. The second book transitions to the influence of celestial bodies on the terrestrial realm. Agrippa examines the astrological correspondences between planets, stars, and earthly events. He elaborates on how the positions and movements of celestial bodies can affect human affairs, weather patterns, and natural phenomena. This section underscores the belief that the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the individual, are interconnected. The third book delves into the realm of ceremonial or ritual magic. Agrippa provides insights into the invocation of spirits, the use of talismans, and the performance of rituals to achieve specific outcomes. He emphasizes the importance of purity, intention, and adherence to specific protocols when engaging in such practices. This book reflects the synthesis of various esoteric traditions, including Kabbalistic and Hermetic teachings. Agrippa significantly influenced subsequent esoteric and magical traditions. The work's integration of various esoteric disciplines provided a framework that many later practitioners built upon. Despite its acclaim, Agrippa's work was not without controversy. The Catholic Church, wary of the potential heretical implications of such esoteric writings, scrutinized and often condemned works on magic and the occult. Agrippa himself faced criticism and suspicion, leading to periods of hardship and persecution. His writings were included in the Church's Index of Forbidden Books, reflecting the tension between emerging Renaissance humanism and established religious orthodoxy. Feng Shui is an ancient Chinese practice focused on harmonizing individuals with their surrounding environment through the strategic arrangement of spaces, objects, and structures. Also known as Chinese geomancy, it's rooted in the belief that the natural world is filled with vital energy known as qi. This energy can be optimized or disrupted depending on how one's surroundings are put together. Although it's frequently discussed today in terms of interior design and real estate, Feng Shui's origins and historical significance stretch back thousands of years. The early beginnings of Feng Shui can be traced to roughly 6,000 years ago, when people were first starting to align human settlements and grave sites with the natural landscape. By the time of the Zhou dynasty, starting in the 11th century BC, Chinese thinkers had begun to develop more explicit guidelines for positioning homes, temples, and tombs. These alignments were made in ways that aligned with cosmological concepts like the flow of qi and the balance of yin and yang. These guidelines weren't purely aesthetic, they were designed to maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, which was a central tenet in Chinese thought. For instance, grave sites were carefully chosen to ensure that ancestors rested in areas believed to be charged with auspicious energy, which would, in turn, benefit their living descendants. By the Tang Dynasty, running from the 7th to 10th centuries AD, feng shui masters had gained considerable influence in imperial courts. Royal palaces, government buildings, and entire city layouts began incorporating feng shui principles to ensure stability, prosperity, and harmony. During subsequent dynasties, the popularity of feng shui spread widely, influencing not only official construction projects and the elites, but also the environments of common people. In these periods, a more standardized body of knowledge emerged, with feng shui texts, manuals, and lineage-based traditions passed down through families of masters. Throughout its long history, feng shui has been influenced by various philosophical and religious currents. Confucianism emphasized social harmony and the importance of honoring ancestors, which resonated with feng shui's focus on selecting burial sites that would benefit future generations. Taoism, with its belief in the fundamental balance and flow of the universe, complemented feng shui's emphasis on qi and the natural order. Buddhism also interacted with feng shui practices. Over the centuries, Buddhist temples and monasteries incorporated feng shui principles to ensure spiritual well-being and tranquility. After China began to open up to the world in the 1980s and 1990s, traditional cultural practices, including feng shui, underwent a resurgence. Architects, interior designers, and real estate professionals worldwide have embraced certain feng shui principles, often in a secularized or watered-down form. In Hong Kong, for example, feng shui masters are often consulted before constructing skyscrapers, and the city's skyline is said to reflect these principles. The global popularity of the practice in the late 20th and early 21st centuries can also be attributed to the broader Western interest in holistic practices, alternative medicine, and spirituality. The Philosopher's Stone has long been regarded as one of the most elusive goals in the history of Western esotericism and occultism. It's a legendary substance that alchemists believed could transmute base metals into gold, cure diseases, and even grant extended or eternal life. Though often dismissed as a quaint relic of pre-scientific thought, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone was anchored in a complex interplay of chemistry, spirituality, philosophy, and mysticism. The roots of the Philosopher's Stone concept can be traced to the Hellenistic period, especially in the city of Alexandria, where various philosophical and religious traditions intermingled. Early texts that influenced alchemical thought, such as the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, laid the groundwork for the idea that matter could be transmuted. Over time, these early works merged with Arab and Persian scholarly traditions. Following the Islamic conquests, Greek manuscripts on natural philosophy and the proto-science of alchemy were translated into both Arabic and Persian. By the Middle Ages, when these Arabic and Persian texts were translated back into Latin, European alchemists were primed to embrace the elusive notion of the Philosopher's Stone. In medieval and early Renaissance Europe, alchemy enjoyed periods of both acclaim and suspicion. The distinction between science and magic was not as clear-cut as it is today, and alchemists often combined practical experimentation with esoteric symbolism. The Philosopher's Stone was not merely a literal object. Rather, many alchemists understood it as the culmination of both a chemical and spiritual journey. In this sense, the stone symbolized perfection, enlightenment, and the harmonization of opposites. Achieving it required not just laboratory work, but also moral purification and personal transformation. The stone's ability to turn lead into gold was seen as a metaphor for uplifting the human soul from its base state to divine perfection. One of the most famous figures associated with the quest for the philosopher's stone was Nicolas Flamel, a 14th century French scribe and manuscript seller. Although historical evidence suggests Flamel's reputation as an alchemist was largely a product of later legends rather than contemporary records, he became a central figure in alchemical lore. According to the stories, Flamel, with the guidance of obscure texts and revelations, supposedly discovered the secret of the stone and achieved both wealth and longevity. Similarly, the 16th century Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus advanced alchemy's medical dimensions and integrated them with natural philosophy. Though he didn't claim to have found the philosopher's stone, Paracelsus believed in the possibility of extracting essences from substances that could cure illnesses and prolong life. His emphasis on observation, experimentation, and the healing potential of minerals and plants helped transition alchemy toward more empirical approaches. The tradition of seeking the philosopher's stone was not confined to Europe's elite intellectual circles. Courtly alchemists worked under royal patronage, hoping to bolster a monarch's wealth and prestige by conjuring gold from cheaper metals. Individuals like Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire were fascinated by alchemy, amassing manuscripts and skilled practitioners in the hope of unlocking nature's secrets. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the rise of the scientific method, better instrumentation, and new theoretical frameworks began to strip alchemy of its mystical elements. By the late 18th century, the dream of the philosopher's stone had effectively receded into myth, replaced by a rigorous approach to understanding of elements and chemical reactions. Also, I mentioned it briefly in passing earlier, but it's really worth emphasizing that the concept of the philosopher's stone was never purely about precious metals. In many treatises, gold was simply the most elevated and incorruptible of metals, symbolizing the highest possible refinement. The stone, therefore, was a metaphor for achieving ultimate purity and understanding the inner workings of nature. This symbolic dimension survived even as the literal pursuit faded. In the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars and esotericists rediscovered alchemical texts with renewed interest, viewing them through psychological and symbolic lenses. Psychologist Carl Jung interpreted alchemical imagery as representations of internal psychic processes. In Jung's reading, the philosopher's stone was the perfected self, reached through individuation and inner work. The concept of the Akashic records has long intrigued spiritual seekers, mystics, and occult scholars. It refers to a purported compendium of every thought, emotion, action, and event that has ever occurred, as well as all future possibilities. Although the idea doesn't originate from any single spiritual tradition, it rose to prominence through late 19th and early 20th century occult movements, most notably within theosophy. Today, it's understood as a metaphysical resource that certain individuals claim they can access to gain profound insight into personal destinies, karmic patterns, and the underlying order of the cosmos. Whether one views it as literal cosmic memory or a symbolic psychological tool, the Akashic records continue to hold a central place in New Age teachings and alternative spirituality. The term Akashic is derived from the Sanskrit word meaning ether or space. In classical Indian philosophies, particularly those found in Hindu and Buddhist texts, the concept was often discussed as a subtle dimension or substrate that permeated everything. While these ancient references didn't speak of an all-encompassing record, The philosophical notion of an etheric substance that receives and holds impressions gave later occultists a conceptual foundation. They speculated that all human experience might imprint itself onto this invisible medium, creating a kind of cosmic library. Such ideas resonated with a general belief in a hidden unity underlying physical existence. In these early frameworks, nothing was entirely lost to time. Instead, every action and thought remained etched into the subtle fabric of reality. However differing from the concept of the Akashic Records is that this concept really appears to have largely referred to the present and future being an unbroken chain of causality from the past. The actual concept of the Akashic Records as a fully formed notion emerged primarily through Theosophy. This was a spiritual movement founded by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott in the late 19th century. Blavatsky, who drew heavily on Eastern traditions, claimed that advanced beings known as Mahatmas, or masters, could read these spiritual chronicles. She wrote extensively on esoteric matters, proposing a cosmology that included subtle planes of existence. Within these higher realms, Theosophists believed, lay the Akashic Records, an immense intangible archive housing the blueprint of all souls and the trajectory of every life. Blavatsky and her successors provided detailed discussions, insisting that trained clairvoyants could perceive past events as if they were unfolding before them. Though many contemporaries were skeptical, Theosophy's expansive vision influenced countless seekers, philosophers, and mystics, especially those dissatisfied with purely materialistic views. In the early 20th century, the Akashic Records gained further visibility through the psychic readings of Edgar Cayce, an American clairvoyant who became famous for his trance sessions. Cayce, who was a devout Christian, didn't claim to have discovered the concept on his own. He simply reported that during his altered states of consciousness, he could tune into a universal source of information. He identified this source as the Akashic Records, describing it as a vibrational field of knowledge that could reveal a person's past lives, health issues, and spiritual lessons. While Cayce's descriptions were more narrative than systematic, his popularity introduced millions of people to the idea that everything they'd ever done, or would do, was recorded. His followers insisted that by consulting this library, one could identify unresolved karmic patterns, discover life purposes, and find guidance for personal growth. Beyond Theosophy and Cayce's work, numerous esoteric traditions have embraced similar notions. In Anthroposophy, founded by Rudolf Steiner, the term Akashic Chronicle appears, representing a spiritual record accessible to individuals who've developed a higher form of cognition. Steiner maintained that initiates could train their inner faculties through meditation, moral development, and rigorous discipline to read these cosmic scripts. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and various Rosicrucian currents have alluded to analogous concepts, though they often use different terminology. In Sufism, certain mystics have spoken of the preserved tablet, a spiritual record described in Islamic tradition. This concept suggests that God has recorded everything that has ever happened or will ever happen, explaining that everything that happens can only be through the will of God. Although it's not identical to the theosophical concept, parallels can be drawn, as it also entails a divine repository of all events. Over the years, alternative spirituality and New Age movements have refined and diversified approaches to accessing the Akashic Records. Practitioners often describe meditative techniques, guided visualizations, or trance states that purportedly allow them to tune into the subtle frequencies where the records reside. Some adhere to complex rituals, using crystals, incense, and prayers to facilitate the connection. Others rely on inner images, trusting spontaneous impressions as valid pieces of information. According to their guidelines, it's not about forcing the mind to produce a narrative. Instead, it's about quieting the intellect and letting impressions arise naturally. They claim that, with time, readers learn to distinguish their personal imagination from genuine insights drawn from a universal database. Many practitioners say it's a personal transformative experience that can help people understand recurring life challenges, discover karmic influences, and recognize their spiritual trajectory. Some New Age thinkers attempt to reconcile the concept with modern physics, arguing that since energy can never be destroyed, everything that's ever occurred leaves some informational trace. While mainstream science doesn't endorse this interpretation, no empirical evidence supports the existence of such an etheric archive. This line of thinking has found wide appeal. The influence of the Akashic records on modern spiritual movements is undeniable. Contemporary spiritual teachers, life coaches, and healers frequently incorporate the concept into their sessions. They offer workshops and courses on how to access the records, promoting it as a tool for self-discovery and healing. Many who participate in such sessions report life-changing insights, feeling as if they've uncovered hidden motivations, past life traumas, or long-standing karmic debts. In these instances, the Akashic records serve a therapeutic purpose. They offer a framework for interpreting life's challenges in a way that encourages growth and responsibility. Also, it's worth noting that the Akashic Records idea is somewhat unique in its explicit focus on recording every detail of existence. While many cultures speak of divine memory or gods who know all human deeds, these notions usually carry a moral or theological dimension rather than describing a neutral archival system. By contrast, the Akashic Records are often depicted as impartial and all-encompassing, existing beyond religious frameworks. It's a universal phenomenon rather than the purview of any single deity. This impartiality appeals to those who've drifted away from traditional religion, but still yearn for metaphysical meaning. The records offer a vision of cosmic justice, not necessarily through divine judgment, but via karmic cause and effect. Every action leaves a trace, and every soul eventually encounters the consequences of its past, thus providing a moral structure that emerges naturally from the universal record.